Hello, Matthew. Hi, how are you?
I am doing well. I'm happy that you could meet this morning.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you so much for accepting our invite for Let's Talk About Data. And I think we booked our session couple of quarters back, and here we are. I hope this session will be a great session for our audience. So before we go into our podcast topic, our audience never seen you on our podcast. So can you please introduce yourself? Tell us about yourself, basics. We'll spend 5-10 minutes on it, and then we go towards our topic.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I am Matthew Rottman. I am an AI consultant, and I've been doing solutions architecture for the past 15 years. And before that, worked in the insurance and banking industries, both as an analyst and a project manager, as well as a solutions architect. And over the past 4 or 5 years, I've transitioned from predictive modeling and data quality into artificial intelligence consulting and helping businesses see that both the LLMs and AI can help them.
Okay, that's good. That's good. So how you end up coming? So you were at a customer end, as you mentioned, insurance, and how you end up towards the consultancy.
So the first thing that happened was COVID. So in COVID, the bank that I was working at had me doing application architecture. And in application architecture, I am a top-down consultant, meaning I always look at data quality, data governance, compliance, and are the business's needs being met? And as an application architect, I was dealing with bottom-up issues, meaning the developers wanted to know, how do I get my data into a data warehouse, or what do you need for the reports? And they were working with Kafka and streaming data and things from a bottom up perspective. And my transition really was to help them see that they still needed to be compliant with their data. They needed to know who had access to the data, and was the data usable. And so it was an interesting exercise in that, working with application developers, they're like, just tell me what I need to program, I'll get you whatever you want.
Yeah.
And that's not how the business needs to see the data. The business needs to know the metadata that can basically, am I allowed to see the data? Is it helpful? And what's the age of the data? How old is it when I'm working with it? And these types of conversations is what I was doing prior to uh, uh, COVID. And then when I worked at the bank, they were very concerned about risk management. And I love that because governance, compliance, and data management is my wheelhouse.
Okay, so when you say that you normally look into this compliance and regulatory because you have come from banking sector, and I agree that the moment you come from a financial sector, your top priority is priority in security, right? So when
Yes.
you look into it, when you say top to bottom, so normally people look into customers' requirement and then they go, which is top, and then they go downwards. And so how because bottom up normally we call it that build an application or build a solution and then find the use case. And top to bottom we have find the use case and then build something. And governance and privacy comes right in the middle. So how do you see that?
So actually, from the banking and compliance aspect of things, regulations and legality are the first things that they always look at. So they want to know, do you have the proper access controls based on policies and legal issues, is what banks usually look at when they're looking at data. And this is for their internal people, by the way. For external customers, they do create applications, but it's usually very personalized, where it's your data. It's not anybody else's data that you're allowed to look at. So they're not as concerned about the policies and the legality there, because if you brought the data and it's your transactions, you're allowed to see it. Is how the applications that are consumer facing and business facing are. So that's relatively simple. But for the compliance aspects of things, as the banks look at it, they always want to make sure that you have role-based security and asset-based security in place. So the banks always put security before they look at their goals. They really tighten everything down so that people really have only data that they have permissible purpose to use, with the exception of sometimes the risk people and the financial and fraud people can get into things that are beyond what they're allowed to see. And then the upper executives of the company also are looking at intellectual property and things that give them, or things that are a differentiator for their business. And so their controls are a little bit different than everybody else. So policy-based security, role-based security, and asset-based security is always what the banks put in before they even look at what they're trying to go for on the results of the solution. They want to make sure that you have the ability to see the data and you have the right to see the data before you even can start the project.
Okay, so I think this is very much related to our today's topic, which we call it, why is it my AI unreliable, right? And
Yes,
before we go into it, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, where this topic comes from is just because of agentic AI and generative AI, where we are allowing, or we are thinking that AI will go on itself, go everywhere, do all those things, do the adoption, all those things will do. And I think that is where the challenge comes. So I think major thing which I am seeing right now in this whole ecosystem is, one is, as you mentioned, privacy and all those kind of stuff. Secondly, whether we allow transparency, which kind of transparency we allow AI, right? So tell us about this topic, why you select this topic and how we go for it.
certainly. So I've been doing consulting work with smaller businesses. And so the first thing is, smaller businesses have a problem in sample size, meaning they don't have enough data to make predictions and diversity in their data so that they actually can take full advantage of predictive analytics and what AI's full potential is. And so they're relying on the LLMs to help them find data. And the LLMs are getting data from Reddit, they're getting data from social media, and they're getting data from the internet. And as we know, the internet is not a reliable source for business decisions.
Cool.
And so the first thing is, working with small business people, you need to help them see if their data is diverse enough and deep enough to help them make the decision that they're trying to make. There are third-party data sources, which I like pointing them to, things from Experian, Equifax, um, and a company in the United States called CoreLogic. And so these are the three companies that I like pointing them to for third-party data sources so they can supplement their data to have a diverse data set.
Okay, so when you actually you have brought a very good point here is, normally people are using generative AI that they want to throw their data into it, but LLM has this capability of hallucination, and you can get it generated a lot of data, random data, or you can give some context as a prompt to the LLM and ask LLM to generate the data. And you are right, when LLM generates data, it's not accurate. It itself says hallucination is there. And when you give that data to your models or AI, of course, if data is not correct, training will not be correct. When training is not correct, output is not correct, right? So
absolutely.
I hope you are referring to this point, right?
Yeah, so we need to kind of address one simple thing about reporting and data. If you look at your data without diversity, you basically see what you see is what you get. So in your reports and in your analysis, it's simply breaking down the data into chunks, into categories or segments that are meaningful to you. In the data warehouse world, we talked about facts and dimensions. So the number one issue is that if you don't have a diverse data set, you really can't slice down and look at multiple dimensions in an interesting way. You can still break the data down by the dimensions that are delivered with the facts or the information that you have. And this is what descriptive analytics or operational analytics is all about. Just show me what happened. The next point, you brought up generative AI and agentic AI. And with the LLMs, they actually go to the internet, and if you don't write a proper prompt to give them the proper context, they're going to give you data that you're not going to be able to use. And they're going to be making assumptions on the data. And one of the interesting things with the LLMs is prior to the current version of the LLMs, everybody was talking about hallucinations. And why is the LLM giving me bad data back or answering questions incorrectly? And you bring up the important point of everybody wants to go to agentic AI and have agents that actually are automated so they can lower their cost basis of analyzing the data and working with it. And when I work with small business people, I try to point out that the first step is the quality controls on your operational data and the data that you know. Clean it up and make sure that you actually can use your own data to write reports. The next step is let's start working with agentic AI, but create simple agents that do something that it would take me a great deal of time to do. And again, it's based on the data that you know. And so you need to ask questions. I call it interrogate your data with questions that you would struggle to answer, but you know your data will answer. So the first level of agentic AI or creating agents is let LLMs, and also you need to figure out if you can use vector databases and RAG to segment the data. And again, from a database architecture perspective, we call this sharding or indexing
Yeah.
of the data so that the questions can be answered in a meaningful way. The fun thing about agentic AI is agentic AI and AI agents are wonderful at telling you what's wrong with your data and what it missed when it created the analysis. So the first thing I advise clients is think about QC and QA as what your agents are going to be doing for you to be able to test your data and also tell you more information about what's wrong with your data to be able to move forward. And again, the topic today of what's wrong with my AI is you are naive is the first thing that I would point out. The next is the LLMs and agentic AI actually is the antidote to that problem as well, thinking about it in evaluation and also guiding you to what your data can show you, and they can write reports for you. The other wonderful thing that people don't miss is that you can ask the LLMs now to create reports and you can visualize it. And using some of the more interesting tools, things like Bolt, Cursor, you can actually have not only the reports created, but you can create data sets with those things automatically without knowing how to actually program. My other favorite thing to advise business people is you can ask the LLM to write SQL against your database. It will tell you how to write the SQL. And so you then don't have to be an expert in writing the queries any longer by using that. And then you can also ask the LLM, how did you do with the SQL query that was written? And my recommendation is look at the proper model and also the proper LLM provider, and don't use the same one to evaluate. Similar to Sarbanes-Oxley in the United States, where they require another audit firm to audit your data, I recommend use another LLM and another model to evaluate your data, your reports, and those queries.
So this is a very great point you have raised, right? That once you go to the external sources, which is LLM in our case, in our example, that we ask LLM to generate some data, correct your data first. Fix your data, make it quality ready, because you can give your data to the external parties to generate something new. If your data itself is not correct, then wrong context will go out, wrong data will come in, right? So
Correct.
another aspect of reliability, right? As you mentioned, in banking sector, privacy is one of the biggest issue, right? But once this agentic AI comes, so how we were tackling this kind of privacy? Because you have to give a lot of access to the agents, right? Because agents has to go to the source system, agent has to go into your warehouse, agent has to go to the external party as well. So there are a lot of vulnerability coming into this whole picture. So how do you see handling these challenges?
So there's two things. You can download for any one of the LLMs their model. And there's a product that I like using called Open Router. An Open Router can go to almost any of the LLMs, but Open Router also can compare LLMs on what it's doing. So you bring up the most important point that I deal with the banks and insurance companies on. Your data needs to be on a virtual private cloud. Let's start there. The next thing is the LLMs. If you're asking a general business question, you can use the public models. However, you must download a private version of the LLMs anytime you're creating intellectual property for your business. And this also needs to be put on your virtual private cloud instance of your data. Those two things are the first points. The next is the business people who go to the LLMs need to be restricted on what they can ask and what they can download from the LLMs. So the important thing that you brought up here is your queries, the things that you ask of your data should be kept in-house. They should not be brought to the public LLMs. The most important questions that you ask about your own data. However, generic business questions I think are appropriate to ask on the public LLMs. And then you need to look at what is the cost basis of this question, which is the other big concern, both on cloud spend and on LLM spend, where most businesses do not realize that a poorly written prompt or query against the LLMs can be costly. And if you're asking the same question of the LLM every single month, you shouldn't be spending money on that same question. And you need to think about it like robotic process automation and repeatable processes, because those types of queries you should bring in-house and run monthly like a standard report that you run in-house.
Yeah, actually, this is another good point you have raised. It like reputation should not happen into the token world because if reputation happens, the cost will go high. And most of the, as per MIT report just came out that 95% project fails. I think one of those reasons, another first biggest reason from my point of view was people were trying to throw all structured data into it and try to get structured data out of LLM. So in a huge data, complex queries are not the thing which you can give it to LLM. Simple queries are fine, right? So how do you how okay, let me go towards taxonomies and ontologies as well, right? Because the moment you go into LLM world, you have so open public LLMs have generic taxonomies and ontologies built into it, right? The moment you make it private, you bring this same kind of taxonomy or ontology, but generic doesn't work. It has to be domain specific. So once you go towards a domain like as we are talking about banking sector, do once we make the LLM private, do we need to train those models again on that, for example, banking domain again before we start using it?
So you're actually moving into another type of question. Most businesses do not know how to create their own private LLM correctly. Meaning, if you just download the model for the LLM, that's not a private model. That's not customized. That is what you need a vector database. That is what you need to understand RAG, and you need to work with your own data and your own documents and resources to be able to work with. And so you bring up a great point in that most LLM projects are failing because the LLM is not customized for them and the data is not your data that most of the questions are being asked. And so what they're doing is they're training their ability to write a prompt, their ability to get a meaningful answer. They're not always using the right data to actually figure out what's best for my business. And again, 80 to 90% of these POCs are failing. And you brought up, or we kind of covered the other issue in that they're realizing it's costing me a lot of money when I do this on my cloud provider. I also have a lot of clients that have Databricks and Snowflake. And this is the other big expense that is interesting in that both Databricks and Snowflakes are wonderful places to store your data. They are not wonderful places to write a random query or a random report on. And you need to control what you're building on Snowflake and Databricks. And you can bring the LLMs into Snowflake and Databricks. But the processing of both the data side, the cloud processing, and access is all going to be done on their platform. So you're going to have a double hit. You're going to be spending from the cloud provider and from these other tools on top of it before you even can work with your data set.
Yeah, you are right, right? The moment you bring, let me bring this structured data as well as you brought in Databricks and Snowflake because these are majorly for structured data where you end up creating lakehouse or warehouse into it, right? So what is your
Correct.
experience when people start pouring in structured data into generative AI and they expect that you end up asking, hey, customer with product, with sales, and with marketing, create a complex query and expect them to give the answer. What is your experience? Is it a successful way to do it in LLM?
So, in working with big data sets, sentiment analysis is the number one thing that people want to know. Do they like me or do they not like me? That's the number one thing. And so, when you're dealing with unstructured data, and again, the LLMs are wonderful for analyzing language. So segmenting your calls or your interactions into positive or negative and doing sentiment analysis is something that the LLMs do really, really well. And so, again, the interesting aspect of this is when you have a data lake house or you have a data lake, working with the unstructured data, the LLMs are wonderful if the data is properly grouped and indexed into meaningful word groups or concepts. And in my background, I actually have a psychobiology background. I would talk about, in cognitive psychology, they talk about categorization of the data. What is meaningful about the data? The LLMs need to understand the context and the meaning of the data, which brings us to the most important thing about any unstructured data or semi-structured data, and that is the metadata and metadata categories that you create for your business people. And we talked about my top-down strategy, and one of the things on a data quality and data governance piece that I work with is helping the business understand you need to think about your metadata and your meta tags to be able to group things into meaningful pieces so that you can integrate and combine your financial data and your sentiment data together to figure out, is this group of customers helping me? Is this group of customers unhappy about me? And this is what your metadata and your tags help you figure out. And so with unstructured data, having a metadata strategy in place as well as a data strategy is important. And when dealing with marketing concepts, sales concepts, you need to figure out what's meaningful for the business and how they language it. What words do they use and how do they want to segment or categorize these things?
I think you have brought this metadata at the right time because I'm a big fan of metadata, and I've been advocating this for years that if even in structured world actually, where nobody cares about metadata actually. Nobody want to describe the column. Right? Last time we had this primary key and foreign key physical there, but now nobody creates it. They're just logical. We know that this is a customer ID and we create a customer ID over there. We know that logically, but we don't hard code constraint, right? We don't enable the constraint. Now people don't even create that primary key foreign key constraint. But so I keep telling people that if you have a proper metadata there, your reporting can be reduced at least 80%. Because if you have a business metadata and technical metadata, and before you even create a dashboard, you can look from the metadata, hey, which kind of data I want, right? Now suddenly this unstructured world or generative AI or LLM world has come. And I think that is where people are really struggling because they want a solution tomorrow. Right? Tomorrow you can only have it if your data is in a good shape. And when you say data, business normally, actually, they should not be aware of it. The reality is they talk about data, they don't even know what is metadata. I think first of all, we need to train them what is metadata, right? Because metadata is also a data, right?
Right.
So how is your customer behaving or giving you feedback? I think the metadata which they never cared, now they really want that. So how they are responding on this demand from IT? We call it about IT side, right?
Sure. So again, with metadata, the first thing that a business person thinks about is technical metadata.
True.
They think about, oh, what system did it come from? How old is the data? These types of things, which are technical metadata, the systems and the age of the data. What they really need to think about is business metadata. We mentioned the word context. And so, what is the business context of that? So I've done quite a bit of work with accounting firms. And when you look at accounting data or financial data, there's something called a chart of accounts. How is the business structured and the data structured? And understanding this is partly technical metadata, like we were just talking, but also which business unit is it part of and what products does that business unit handle? And being able to translate from the technical metadata into the business context is something that the LLMs can handle. They can also help you think through what meta tags and categories you need to create to get the right answers, both on your unstructured data, but also for your sales data versus your financial data, to be able to break down not only the customer and product aspects of things into meaningful categories, but the financial implications of that as well.
So again, a critical question I'm going to throw towards you. When you say this, which I absolutely agree, but this has become a pipeline then again, because you have to process your data. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you're asking LLM to read the data from your tables and suggest tags to you, which is doable, because LLM can read your table and say, hey, I feel this is an address column. I feel this is maybe a product code. It can tell you. It can tell you the regions. It can tell you the categorization. It can suggest you all that, right? But that's a
Yes,
pipeline, right?
yes.
Now, software engineer folks says that to in this new world of agentic AI, one pipeline should do everything. So are we saying that we still need traditional batch processing to generate metadata and then another pipeline which can do a real-time data product creation? I hope I'm able to put my question because that's people are looking into it.
Yeah, no, you actually, just because generative AI exists doesn't mean you throw out your pipeline concepts. However, I do want to mention that generative AI and the new version of pipelines are not your ETL workflows.
Mhm.
You need to understand that your ETL that exists today and your existing pipelines are a liability.
Mhm.
And of course, for data stage and informatica and ab initio, those are fighting words. And they want you to know that you can't just throw out all of these ETL processes that you've had for all these years. And again, if it's financial structured data, I agree with them completely. But you hit on the important thing of if it's unstructured or semi-structured data, you don't need a programmer to figure out these things. And so it's a balancing act between old legacy ETL processes and new generative AI based workflows to bring things in. And again, using tools like Bolt and Make to be able to figure out things is very helpful. For many years, I would help business people use a tool called Alteryx. And with Alteryx, they would say, oh, I can figure out so many things with Alteryx to be able to figure out my information. I don't need to do ETL. And then I'd point out, remember, I'm a top-down guy, I'd point out, you have a governance problem when
Yeah.
you're using a desktop tool to manage all of your data. You need to limit what data the person has access to. Again, the security aspect of things, the privacy aspect, and the liability or risk aspects. If you have desktop tools that go and get too much data, you have a problem. And so you need to think about your security architecture and your data pipelines and data architecture to make curated data sets that are appropriate for the different sets of users, which I think answers exactly what you were asking about, in that the new version of the truth is the truth you're allowed to see.
Yeah, but this brings a challenge, right? Let me throw a challenging question, right? Because last time we were doing machine learning, based on a dump of data. We used to give the whole dump to the data scientists and they used to train. Now, with your top-down approaches, we need to give data scientists only those data sets which is relevant for their model, right? They can only see.
Actually, I beg to differ. The term data scientist and data engineer, these people should be allowed to work with all of
All
the
data.
data. They
Correct.
should be given a license to create trouble for you.
Hmm.
However, you bring up the other important issue is they need their own sandbox. They should not be creating it in the data lakehouse, data warehouse, or on the data lake. They should be doing it in their own private environment because they do create things that are very hazardous from a risk perspective and an exposure perspective on they actually are mad scientists in creating new products that actually have great value, but they also have great potential to create harm for your business. And so, when working with the data science team and data engineers, they need their own sandbox to create this in. And then you bring up the other term, which is a citizen data scientist.
Yeah.
Now, with the LLMs, everybody can imitate what a data scientist does.
Yeah.
I mean, my favorite thing is all of the LLMs are pointing out, and all of the AI pundits are saying, "Well, you don't need a consulting firm anymore from an accounting firm because all of your advisory work can be done by the LLM."
Yeah.
And the truth is, your upper level executives can take advantage of that. The problem is, to your point, if you bring all of your data to a naive user who doesn't have rights to ask those important questions about where our blind spots or our trouble spots in our data are, you then expose your business to people who should not have access to those big picture questions.
Yeah. And the people who do not understand the end-to-end data, and when LLM hallucinate, they won't even know what LLM is telling them. So, but you have solved my one more problem and you have seconded that sandboxing. Okay, let me ask you one more question. Actually, this session is going very good. That sandbox, you remember last time, like 15, 20 years back, our sandbox supposed to be in production. We used to pipeline everything. We used to create a semantic layer. And in semantic layer, in production, we used to create a sandbox for business. So business IT folk used to get the production data from semantic layer into the sandbox. They used to play with it, production data, and then from real data, they used to say, hey, IT, I want one more dashboard. I want a new predictive model. And then the whole IT used to do that. But nowadays, people are creating sandbox and development environment. They are
Right.
calling it R&D. And when you go into development environment, regulatory body says or compliance says you cannot have an actual data, right? You have to have a mock-up data or anonymized data. The moment you have it, your data is not clean, it's not high quality. What I say that whenever you have a new initiative, even this R&D need to sit in production because technologies are so mature that you can create guardrails behind around it. I feel this all data scientists and as you mentioned, data engineers as well, park them into production, ask them to do development in production network zone with actual data and all privacy policies, guardrails put there. What do you say about that?
So you bring up an important point about semantic layers and APIs that are under
Yeah,
control.
yeah.
And so the first thing is you alluded to another big problem, and that is business people don't think about development environments or test environments. They think only in terms of I want that in my production environment. And we also mentioned ETL processes and that the LLMs can go get data that they have access to. Well, in a dev environment, it should be for testing and practice. Semantic layers, as they were delivered in business intelligence, were business views that really were controlled for the proper business purposes. And they had usually access controls that were role based, not asset based on how they did things. And this really is the conundrum in that business people, when they look at their reporting and they look at their data, think in terms of production environments, not dev environments. And a dev environment really is the critical issue in that you need to figure out how dirty and how diverse is my dev environment to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, because see, nowadays external data has become the bigger piece of your data, right? And when we talk about external data, we pull data from using DaaS services, data as a service, right? And source production data is coming into your dev. Now, one of the biggest challenges is how to anonymize it, how to mask it, how to use it for all kind of models. Right? So this is a challenge. Are you facing this kind of challenge at your customer ends?
So I think it's actually not understanding best practices in data management is actually the big picture. And again, when you go from very small businesses to medium-sized businesses to large enterprises, they do understand from a large scale down what dev and test environments are all about. And we talked a little bit about sandboxes, and the question is, does my sandbox have test data in it? Does my sandbox exist in a dev environment where I'm actually moving it from a dev environment to a production environment? And what are the requirements to migrate from dev to test to production? And again, if you're looking at descriptive analytics and operational reporting and things, tell me what my data is and what happened to my business, this should be benign. Everybody should have the rights to look at their business unit or department as appropriate to be able to look at this. But when you get into more important questions, and this is really the purpose of this conversation, is that the broader questions that you want to ask of your data, you need more important, stricter controls on what types of data is allowed to be seen to work with. And again, it's more than writing a proper prompt. It's more than figuring out, does my production environment have the data that I want? It's, do I have the rights to work in that? And to again, the bigger picture issue is in the old days, your business intelligence tool or platform used to control what you were allowed to see. So the layers underneath, the data layers and the sources that you were allowed to see were controlled by the business intelligence architects and the business intelligence teams on how they handled it. Now they've gotten rid of many of the BI platforms and they've gotten rid of their standard data warehouse, saying, oh, I don't need a data warehouse because my data lake has everything. Well, your data lake has garbage in it. And if you're bringing test data in there to test out your hypotheses on your LLMs or on your advanced analytics in AI, you're going to have some problems because you need to control that like it's a dev environment.
Yeah, see, when people say that you don't need data lake houses or warehouses, right, which is one of our data modeling technique, I do differ with them. I say, yeah, you need a small data product, you need a small pipeline in a real time, but you still need standard data management practices in place along with data governance practices, right? So
Yes.
yeah, we are already there around 30, 40, 35 minutes, right? So I won't take more than 10, 15 minutes of yours. Uh, do you have a hard stop at 9:30, is
Uh,
it?
I do in about 6 minutes.
Okay, so let's wind it up. Let me take you to the last question that in agentic AI, right? In agentic AI, people say that we need a very small data products, very small. I need two KPIs, I have 10 table from source. So they say agentic AI will create a pipeline on the fly. It will create on the fly, it will create the data pipeline on the fly, create, let's say the whole pipeline needs three or four data products. It will create, it will crash. Go to the next step, it will create, crash, and give you the output, right? But for me, it looks like you will lose a lot of lineage, you will lose a lot of audit trails. So how do you see this handling this? Because you are from governance, right? You go from top to bottom. If a agentic AI pipeline creates a data set and drops it, go to the next step, create it, drops it. How do you see this as a risk?
So I think the more important question is for the tools that you're using, are they before or after your controls are in place? And the real issue is that the byproducts that are created by these tools may be hazardous. And you mentioned it dropping things or
Yeah, yeah.
sending files. And the question is, where is the data going? And so, many of the uh, newer products are 100% cloud in what they do. I've been taking classes on vibe coding, and vibe coding is where you use natural language to be able to do things. And as you know, as my background is in formal IT management, I look at this as it's very powerful in what it creates, but it's also sometimes creating stuff that's completely unintentional and, to your point, dangerous when it's dropping the data that is the output set, and you may not be able to understand or use the answer that it's giving. And
And you might
again,
not be able to regenerate it because when the timestamp has gone, source data has changed. You might not be able to regenerate it for your Linux.
so that's also another thing that the heritage of the data, meaning the information about how old the data is it the authoritative system of record? Is it something that's trustworthy that it's using? Or is it just getting me an answer and leaving it at that, not understanding the context of the heritage or value of that source that it's using? And to your point, people that are doing web analytics and looking at things don't realize there's a perishability and half-life to how that information is usable and a useful life on what's happening. And to the other point, um, sometimes the agentic AI agents or the tools that you're using are using a different set of data than you thought the first time you asked the
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
And so these changes in data sources, you need to be able to look at referential information about how it came up with the answer. And by the way, one of the biggest tips that I'll give listeners here is that whenever using an LLM, request that it asks you questions at each step of the process so that it tells you what's happening as you're creating the process so that you can understand what that is. Also, I think an important question here is, what is the source of my data? And can you remind me at each
Yeah.
step, what are the sources and how old is it? So that I know what the time series or time aspect is that you're making decisions off of. And you can ask the LLM in your prompt to give you that information in the output.
Absolutely. So we have one last minute there. Actually, you are spot on that. I was just creating a training on data, and it was giving me some rubbish data, rubbish output. So I start asking it, whenever you give me an output, you have to give me the citation and evidence of the source where you're generating that. The moment start asking that, then the results were good because it was only giving the output where it can find the evidence and citation. Again, Matthew, it was a great session. Thank you so much. We have a hard stop. Pleasure. And I think this was our first session. It should not be our last session. Let's catch up maybe 2, 3 quarters from here when there'll be more technology changes as it is keep moving in 3 to 6 months. Again, thank you so much for the time and pleasure meeting to you.
It's been my pleasure. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Take care. Bye bye.